Before we begin, let me restate tonight's topic. How do we balance agriculture's water needs with maintaining vibrant communities, and how do historical water rights influence this discussion? I will now open the contest by asking that each contestant stand and in voluntary order give their 30-second opening statement.
When the well is dry, we know the worth of water, said Benjamin Franklin. Tonight, as we discuss the importance of balancing the needs of agriculture with water, with maintaining communities that will exhilarate along with agriculture, it is important that we realize that with water security, we will have food security. As we discuss tonight, also the historical needs of water, we need to also take into consideration that this used to be considered an unlimited resource.
There are 22,000 cubic miles of freely available fresh water on the earth at any given time. However, California and many other states are currently experiencing one of the most severe droughts on record. In conjunction with the increasing overreach of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers ruling on the Water of the U.S. Act, agriculturalists, along with vibrant communities, must find new ways in order to make available fresh, clean water.
Being from Kentucky, you've likely heard the saying, if you don't like the weather, wait a couple days and it'll change. Well, in 2011, we had the wettest year on record since 1895, according to Dr. Foster at WKU Climate Center. Now, that was followed up in 2012 by a terrible drought. As you can see, we must be prepared for what we can't control. And as Cody mentioned with California and what they've experienced in a 4-year drought, we've got to be poised to manage our resources and make a plan for action in our state.
As farmers and advocates for the agriculture industry, we face numerous issues daily. The American Farm Bureau Federation recently declared the deficit for the water of the U.S. the most detrimental thing to farmers today. We need to continue to work at the grassroots level here in Kentucky with our Farm Bureau groups, as well as other organizations, to fight back against these over-regulations and continue to build vibrant economies, as well as work with farmers and agriculture needs with the water conservation issues.
You may now begin with your discussion.
As we look at this and we think about balancing agricultural's needs with our vibrant communities and that struggle, I think it is important that we can gather some information by looking at the historical perspective. 1792, our Commonwealth was forming, and in our state we had riparian rights, where if Cal and I lived next to each other and we had a stream in the middle, our property lines were in the middle of that stream, and as long as we were good neighbors and didn't do anything to stop the water flow or add pollution, there weren't many problems. Now, what we have today, what's raising national awareness, is the prior appropriations form of water rights. With the Colorado River Compact, with California, Nevada, Arizona, they're having some struggles now, especially with the California's drought. California is experiencing a 4-year drought. This year, 75% of all their land got 20% or less of their normal water for surface water. 44% of their land didn't see any surface water at all. Now, that wasn't only just because of the weather, it was also because of a lack of preparation. They had set up water storage systems in the 30s that were outdated and abandoned in the 70s due to other environmental impacts. Also, their systems were based on snowfall instead of rain. So even if the California got the rain they needed, then a lot of that didn't hit the ground directly would be wasted anyway. So Cody, I know that you are a farm manager in Marion County at the Loretto Mother House. Looking at what's happening in California, what can we as Kentucky learn from what they're experiencing as we move forward with Farm Bureau and forming a plan to alleviate these needs with communities and agriculture?
Yeah, Randy, I thank you for allowing me to discuss this portion of it. Something that I find interesting, and you mentioned it a little bit, was about how California over the past has really designed their system based on ages-old technology. And something that I find very interesting is one way that they sort of mitigated some of the issues of the drought that they're experiencing is through the use of basically little black ping pong balls, and they would take these little black ping pong balls, millions upon millions of these things, and flood these basins that they pull their water from. And what this did is it allowed them to be able to reduce the evaporation from these large basins of water to mitigate some of that water loss through the drought period. And so I think something that's very interesting that we need to look at going forward is how can we manage some of this water storage a little bit better? Instead of being reactive, why don't we try to be proactive? And I think that's a lot of the issue that California is currently being confronted with is their reaction to it rather than their being proactive to it. And so, Mary, I know on your farm you all do a lot of fruit and vegetable production. That's generally a very water-intensive crop. What do you all do for any kind of water conservation and water storage?
Well, I love that you asked because I'm chomping at the bit to tell you a little bit about what we do with water on our farm. Water allows us to be able to provide vegetables for the city of Louisville. When we started raising produce, we knew if we were going to raise produce, we had to have a water source. Because quite frankly, when you are raising edible crops, you are selling water. And so on our farm, we had a natural waterway went through there that really was not valuable for production in any other way. So it was a natural fit for us to build a pond there. And we have it's probably a 40-acre watershed that goes into that pond that allows us to, and because we're in Kentucky and we have an abundance of water at times, it's not even a controversial decision for my husband and I. We can run that pump every day during our growing season and use drip irrigation and be able to control how much water our plants get. Because we have, in a very small scale, we have utilized water management. And I feel like that's what we've got to do here, because if you think about it, all of our products that we raise as farmers, and every living thing requires two things. It requires water and it requires food. So let's take this, like our small scale farming operation, and what we've been able to do with, quite frankly, we feed the city of Louisville fresh fruits and vegetables during the summer because of our pond. That is the reality of it. So we can take this on a much broader scale, but we've got to keep in mind from state to state, every state is dealing with different types of water. In Kentucky, there's times that we have too much water. But then there's times if you don't have a pond there available or irrigation set up that you don't have water. So as we think about, and Randy talked about Farm Bureau on ways that it can get involved, I know that in Kentucky we're working on a 20-member task force is working towards being proactive, not finding ourselves in the corner, which is what unfortunately California has done, and being able to stay ahead of the ball game. So Kyle, what are some of your thoughts on what that task force can do for us?
Well, first off, I agree, Mary, that we need to continue to embrace technology as well as what Cody was saying. We can now control basically irrigation systems from our smartphones, which pretty much everyone has, up to the minute. We can see that from anywhere we're at, and I think we need to continue to do that. I think Farm Bureau has been on the forefront of educating people, not only farmers, but other groups and other activists about using this technology. And something that Kevin Jeffries, who was on that commission, spoke about yesterday was the Messinette system that's monitored by Western Kentucky University. It was federally funded. Senator McConnell was able to get this program funded, and it's currently in 65 of our 120 counties. And this is a website. They also want to develop an app, but it tells you up-to-the-minute weather predictions. It predicts droughts. It predicts severe rainfall. And they also have soil probes that measure the water in the soil, so we know that as well. And all that can be accessed from anywhere. The problem is they lack funding. And I wanted to talk a little bit to Randy, who is in education as well as you with your husband was a teacher. Do you all think that a Messinette system and through Western Kentucky University, would this be something that is worth funding through the state legislature or through the Kentucky Ag Development Fund? Is this something that you would suggest we do with our post-secondary education and our universities?
And I wasn't able to attend yesterday, but I called a friend, a farmer, Quint Pottinger, who was there. And to quote Quint directly, if I can remember, he said, "This water management working group is one of the best initiatives Farm Bureau has done in the last 10 years. He's really impressed with their focus on what he mentioned was trying to predict our water needs throughout the next 100 years so we can be prepared. Drought management prediction systems. And as you're mentioning with these systems of measurement, one of the publications that this WMWG group put out through Farm Bureau earlier this year stated that we only have one ground or underground surface water monitoring system in Western Kentucky at that time, and that we're not able to manage the water quality and be aware of what's happening there. But I think one of the things looking at vibrant communities, we've talked a lot about agriculture. We got to think about the opposition Farm Bureau is going to be facing out there. Some of the issues that we're seeing is vibrant communities. People want rivers to be for recreational use, provide habitat for species of animals. And I mentioned the Colorado River Compact earlier. The dams that are built there, less water flowing through there all the way down to Mexico. They're seeing some of those river basins that used to be green and lush with plant life, they're now barren. And people are opponents to that and what it limits. And one of the things looking at is where water and watersheds, they provide habitat, is what should Farm Bureau's stance be on using water for agricultural purposes when it might endanger a species or might limit their ability to carry on? Should Farm Bureau be active in that? And how do we poise ourselves not to come across as that we don't care about these carrying on the lives of these species of animals?
Well, Randy, I think it's a very interesting point that you make there. And I think that as agriculturalists, we are stewards of the land. And that's not just about raising crops. That's about raising families. That's about caring for the environment and making it better for the next generation. And I think one way that we can do that is by keeping the environment in this discussion. And when you talk about the habitat and the nature and the invertebrates and all these kind of things that are going to be in these wetland areas that may be depleted through the use of water. There's some other ways that we can manage our water a little bit better as well through things like no-till, utilization of cover crops, being able to ensure that the water that we do get is being utilized a little bit better, picking good hybrid crops that are able to utilize the water a little bit more efficiently than some other the older varieties of these crops that are out there. But something else that I would kind of like to discuss, and Randy, you alluded to it a little bit about the other folks that are out there and the opposition that we're going to have. Well, we have a little bit of opposition in agriculture as well because we get a lot of kickback about the nitrates that are in water from runoff. However, a lot of these nitrates they're actually finding now are coming from the cities. And a part of this question is maintaining vibrant communities. And so what can we do with Farm Bureau and as agriculture to ensure that we're managing this high nitrate runoff from the cities?
Yeah, you want to go, Mary?
You're fine. Go ahead.
Well, when you were mentioning that a lot of this is coming from the cities, we've proved that. And we've done that by the Kentucky Ag Development Fund has actually financed $500,000 over 3 years to do independent water quality testing. They've done that through the United States Geological Service. They do that testing. It's based out of a Christian County group. Wayne Hunt was a key advocate to get this done because we knew all along that farmers and agriculture leaders, we're conservationists. We want the land, we want the water to be good. So we knew that what we were doing was right. So through this grant, we're able to create an independent study that measures the water when it comes in through the Ohio River and flows through Kentucky and into the Mississippi. And we've actually proved that key agriculture areas that are in West Kentucky, Christian County, Callaway County, Owensboro, places like that, where our agriculture is at our largest, where we're applying the most amount of fertilizer, that's where the water was the cleanest. And that independent study proved that. It proved, like you say, Cody, that this was coming from the cities, maybe from golf courses. We don't know exactly what yet. But we have been able to prove that it's not from our farmers and it's not from these agriculture groups and industries. And I just wanted to add that funding. And
I'd like to add a little bit, and I think that there are no easy answers to this situation. But Randy, you touched on something that I think we all need to be, especially as we're in the brainstorming mode here. We need to be aware of the social aspects of this, and we are, this generation of millennials, they're making a lot of decisions based from their heart and not necessarily based on science. And I bring them up because they are our up-and-coming leadership. And if you think about the environment, and we we need to try to remove the us and theys of this, but there are going to be folks who are trying to say we need to not use this water for agricultural uses because of some endangered species. And I appreciate the stance of American Farm Bureau that says we cannot not use water just because an endangered species is living there. And I appreciate that viewpoint, and I think we need to apply it here in Kentucky. But there are some other major water issues going on across the country that we can learn about, and yes, bring back to Kentucky, but think about those situations. And I think we've got to figure out how to connect with those folks in the city who are blaming it on agriculturalists, who maybe where those nitrates are coming from, and let them connect with the value of water to the value of food. Guys, if we don't take care of, we as a country don't take care of our water situation, we're going to be dependent, on other countries for our food. If we don't want to be energy dependent, how bad would it be to be food dependent? And so, if there's a lot of, it's a very complicated situation. A lot of, laws are going to have to go in. But I don't want to brush over the idea where you talked about with the environmentalists. And that brings open a whole nother case. You've got water situations that vary in Wyoming, in California, New York, that are very different than Kentucky's.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that back up, and I want to recap some of the issues we all discussed there. But in that case, in American Farm Bureau policy book for 2015, one of the things they encouraged, instead of forcing landowners to use water for these endangered species, to encourage landowners through something called a critical habitat, where if I have a farm and there's an endangered species in Kentucky, I could use my land to host those animals, that species, to thrive and prosper. So Farm Bureau is active in that and ensuring that those that might be opponents of that would benefit. And you also mentioned upcoming generations thinking from the heart, and they might judge these situations and judge agriculture harshly. The UK Cooperative Extension's working with USDA and other programs in something called the 40-gallon challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but to take this into the cities, like you mentioned, and get people involved that don't have agricultural roots, is getting people in our country, young people especially, through youth programs, trying to aim for 40 gallons of water use or less per day. Things, limiting a shower, how many, don't do the dishes till the dishwasher's full. Some of those things gets those people involved and working with the agriculture industry. And you mentioned nitrates. I looked at something, NBC Bay Area News, because all the things that are happening in California, and they compared California's situation with Israel. Israel's actually, they showed a picture, and on a lot of the homes, there were water collection systems, cisterns there that were collecting water for their homes, and it also looked at their wastewater. They recycle 85% of their wastewater, where California is less than 7%. So I think that's a big part of having those vibrant communities and helping that out. And finally, I don't want to talk too long, but I want to bring this up. The Water Management Working Group for Farm Bureau, one of the big points they have, and I think is a key thing that we must address today, is that the Division of Water in Kentucky has a drought mitigation plan. It was formed in 2008, but one of the things it lacks is any appropriations for agriculture. If we're going to ensure that agriculture can grow with our communities, we have to get that revised through advocating that agriculture's got to be a part of that. And the number one thing that Kentucky is hitting on through our policy book is making sure that our livestock needs are met.
Well, I would like to refer back to the Kentucky Division of Water, and you were talking about back into 2008. I'm going to go a few years forward into 2010 and talk about a body of water that's not far from here, the Floyd's Fork. And they were threatened with litigation because citizens thought that water might be polluted. Well, they asked them to check for those nitrates. The Kentucky Division of Water at that time did not have a formula or a model that could measure that. So they went to the EPA, who then had an independent engineering group that developed a model. The problem was this model came from DC and it was flawed. It assumed that corn, soybeans, tobacco, or pasture all used the same amount of fertilizer, that every field they saw was contributing the same amount of fertilizer. And this goes back into the Ag Development Fund and the importance of independent testing. But it was the fact that we were reactive on that issue. You spoke about that, Cody, that we need to remain proactive, and Farm Bureau and the Water Management Group needs to continue to be proactive, and they are working with UK. And in this Floyd Fork issue, it started in 2010. It's still on hold because we need to develop a model. It's something that the Water Management Group, the Independent Study Group, is working on so that we can continue to prove that it's not agriculture that's doing it. But that's something that happened in 2010. And if we would have been on the ball, if we would have already had that model in place, we could have done that, and we could have proved that it was not agriculture that was doing that. But it's taken 5 years before we even got that independent study, and that it's still on hold. And that's a problem. That's something we need to continue with this water management group to push forward to find a sufficient model that shows this. And I think working with our research universities is a good way to do that as well.
And I think, Kyle, to get down to the why is that important. I serve on our Shelby County Farm Bureau Board, and there's a gentleman who farms land right up to Floyd's Fork. In the last several years, it's several times a year, we hear him talk about what risks that this poses to his operation. He has friends from the Chesapeake Bay area, and he sees a lot of parallels between their situation and what they're facing and what he fears is down the pipeline. This man is a full-time farmer, a very successful farmer, and he is afraid he's going to have to etch out another hour or 2 hours every morning for this all kinds of required paperwork. And so these are, to me, the real-life application of how serious this is. It's serious in every state in different manners.
And I think one of the things that we've seen this year was the waters of the United States from the EPA and how burdensome that was going to be with how we identified water on the farm that wasn't even close to navigable water with permits for pesticides and herbicides. That would be an issue that goes along with that. And this year at the summer outing, there was a farmer from Mercer County talking about a problem he was having with burdensome regulations. He wasn't allowed to pump water out of the stream or river there at his farm and bring it up in a tank to water his livestock. His only alternative was to build a gravel pad down by the body of water, fence it off, and bring them down to irrigate closely. That raises different issues with having animals closer to the water, runoff, things of that nature. Cody, what would be your response with how do we get more active in influencing these state and government decisions? And should it be at the state or national level that we aim our efforts to make water rights easier for farmers to do their job?
Well, I think something interesting about this water issue is that whichever state you look at, the needs and the recommendations are so much different. And so in that respect, I think that the states need to be very cautious and make sure that the needs that they have are being met. And whether it's on a national or a state level is really yet to be determined. I think something that's probably more important in these early stages is something that the Water Management Working Group is doing very good right now is getting new information. Something that we've talked about a couple of times here is that some of these models and things are working off of 30-year-old data. And Randy, you mentioned that there was the one well monitoring station in the state of Kentucky. And I was speaking with Todd Clark, a Fayette County Farm Bureau member who's on the Water Working Management Group, about if you see a map of all of the monitoring stations in the nation, you can pick out Kentucky very easily because of the lack of dots that are in Kentucky, and there's just one dot, and then all around it is the silhouette of the state. So, you know, Kyle, you were talking about funding for this Mesonet project. I think those are some areas that we need to work on now to be proactive, to be able to get the information so we can make good, informed decisions. I think it's a tragedy to make a decision without good information. And so getting that information is going to be key in these stages. So Mary, what are some other things that you can think of that would be good for helping us get information to make decisions going forward?
I think that Kentucky is really leading the way. We've made a lot of progress since the drought plan that came out in 2008. And I think if we can continue on this, I think there's a lot of ideas spurring, such as maybe some tax incentives for our state, for our farmers to be able to figure out ways to manage the water. Because if you all remember, I know I do, it really affected our farm this year, all the rain that we had. Well, then it's like the spigot shut off. And if we could be able to figure out ways, like in our case, we built that pond, so that's great for our vegetables, but that doesn't help our tobacco crop, that doesn't help our pastures, that doesn't help our corn and beans. So, but figuring out, ways to incentivize landowners to be able to hold that water for in times of need. I would like to kind of change gears so that we don't miss over, I know Randy, you mentioned early on, but the historical water rights. And I know Farm Bureau has taken some stances from a national level on being able to make sure that landowners in the West, in areas where there are historical water rights in place, that those are treated as an asset, and that farmer can realize that value. In studying this and coming to understand it, this was a concept that, to me as a farmer in Kentucky, is quite foreign. But if you are a landowner and your family settled in 1846 and you happen to be the first ones there, because most of those that discovered the land were farmers. Those were who started out needing the water. Then they have access to that water. Whereas you may be a new neighbor or a newer, even if it was 2 years later, you don't have the same access to that water. So that creates some issues that us here in Kentucky aren't having to deal with. But I think as agriculturalists, whether you're a farmer or an advocate for farming and continuing food production, we need to think about that, because in all of this, it comes down to, we don't have any control over the climate change or the fact that Kentucky gets 40 to 50 inches of rain versus Wyoming or California's maybe 2 or 13 inches a year. But we do have some control over the management. And so one of you all like to add your input on these historical water rights. And I appreciate, as a landowner, I appreciate the stance that American Farm Bureau has had in making sure that those rights are protected, even though it brings about a lot of challenges that we're going to have to deal with.
Absolutely. And even historical cases in Kentucky, Wathen versus Wathen, you have an instance even where bodies of water change directions, avulsion, and those issues, that could put a farmer in a very tough situation. So it is a concern, those historical water rights and how they're dealt with. And going back to, so I think that's very, very important that we look at that. And in conjunction with that, I mentioned Israel earlier. One of the things Israel is doing to manage their water, even in times of drought, similar to California in the past, is they don't have as many water districts as our states typically do. California has 412 different water districts. I looked up a Division of Water today, or Department of Finance to Kentucky, and I couldn't count the number of water districts we had in Kentucky. So looking at that, one of Israel's standpoint is there's less fighting if we don't have so many people with their hand in the pot trying to reach out and get those rights. And I know, Kyle, you were part of the race for the Kentucky Commissioner of Agriculture and are current on kind of how we look at things at the state level. But how do we address that moving forward, and especially with our drought mitigation plan? In that case, what specifics do we need to have in there to ensure that we're not fighting amongst ourselves and that we can delegate the water as appropriately needed?
Yeah, well, I think that we do have too many, and that the more hands you do have in the pot, the worse it's going to be. But when you go back to funding or tax incentives or anything like that, Farm Bureau is not alone in this fight. When we look at other litigation, say in Texas, it started at a local level, went to the state, and then American Farm Bureau joined in with oil and gas groups, forestry groups, which are strong in Kentucky, joined in with Cattlemen's Association, pork, home builders, road contractors, all major players that want their hand in the pot that this waters of the U.S. affects and that different water rights affect in Kentucky. They're all going to come to the plate. We need to work with these groups, and if there's a way to fund something or defund something and to reduce this, we need to bring all groups. We don't need to just center ourselves around the farming community and Farm Bureau alone. I think we need to reach out to these other groups that have similar interests that this affects and work with those groups. And in this case, if we need to defund something, then we need to go. Farm Bureau is known for their strong lobbying efforts because we started at a grassroots level. I think if it's in a case to defund something like this, then we need to bring these groups to the table, their lobbyists as well, and go to Frankfurt or go to D.C., start at our judges and magistrates, whatever it might be. I don't know how localized these are necessarily, but we need to work with all these groups and bring everyone to the table, so that way we can shut these down, and then we don't have that problem.
If I could, I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that too. You mentioned with tax incentives and working together for these water rights. Farm Bureau, traditionally, a lot of issues, they're for small government, letting states make their decisions. Are we contradicting some of the beliefs of self-government if we start consolidating these water districts? I know I posed the question, but also at the same time it's conflicting. Do we have to be careful about getting too big and having less control at the local level? Cody, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Randy, I had that sort of thought whenever you mentioned about how many, maybe there were too many water districts, but could there not also be a major issue with having too few water districts? The more heads you have in the room, the more opinions they have, and maybe there's a better opinion in one of the individuals that would have been cut out through the consolidation effort. But Kyle, something that you mentioned that I really like is talking about working with some of these other groups. And a part of this question is maintaining vibrant communities. And Mary, I'm pretty sure you were the person that I heard say at one time that agriculture is nothing without our consumers. And so, with thinking about how we need to maintain vibrant communities, Mary, you're working with the fresh fruits and vegetables. At the Loretta Mother House Farm, we raise beef for consumption there at the facility. And if it weren't for those mouths that we needed to feed, we wouldn't be here doing what we are today, doing what we're loving to do. So does anybody have any response to how we can work with those vibrant communities?
I think that's important, and I think as we're wrapping up our discussion, we can sit here and problem solve till we turn blue in the face, but we've got to get aggressive, proactive, and do something about it. And I think it's where the urban and the cities have to come together. You're not going to have a strong community without a strong agriculture base. And I think we can use Farm Bureau along with their network of supporters that Kyle had mentioned, and really, share why this is important, what we've got to do about it. And it does start locally. This is a national issue that's very, very deep, but it's got to start at home. And if it's something that we can take away from this and go back and talk to our own communities so that, those of us in Kentucky, it kind of seems foreign. So if we can start showing them that this is important and to prevent something down the road from happening. But I think it's key is that we've got to come together, whether it's through Farm City banquets and have a water discussion there to make it relevant. If it's through social media, for those of us that see the prevalence here, to start bringing it forward. But we've got to we've got to talk, but we've got to get active and proactive about it. You take what the working group in Kentucky is doing, take what communities in Wyoming are utilizing. Let's learn from the mistakes of California and move this ball forward and help strengthen not only agriculture, but the communities too. Whether it's urban or a rural community, we've got to take care of them and treat them with respect, them meaning our consumers, because without them, what good is our product?
Yeah. So, Mary, something that I really like from that is that it does start locally. And a statistic that I saw throughout studying through this information is that it takes 800 to 1,000 gallons of water to produce a 1,200 calorie diet. And, talking about educating our consumers, if we could actually show them how much water it requires to feed them one day, how impactful would that be? I think that would actually be impactful to me if I could see, exactly how much water does it require for me to have a full calorie diet for one day. That's pretty impactful. So, I think it does start locally, and it starts with us educating our consumers about what water needs agriculture does have. And you talked about the 40 gallons a day. I think that's a really interesting topic because normally, people use around 62 gallons a day, so that's a pretty big reduction. Randy, what do you have to say about that?
Well, and you're on point. One of the main focuses of the group that Farm Bureau has formed, the Water Management Working Group, is public education and ensuring that people are aware. And you mentioned that. Currently, 56% of the water in Kentucky is used for human consumption around the house. 25% industry. Agriculture's cut of that is about less than 5%. And irrigated cropland, corn and soybeans together, is less than 2%. So for me, I think the drought litigation or program for limiting or appropriating water for agricultural use is a very important part of this committee and Farm Bureau. And if we have time, I'd like to hear what your main point would be as well.
Yeah, I think the drought mitigation is going to be important, but consumer education going forward is going to be so important for this topic because we've got to work with our...
Time has been called. We will now have 1 minute of quiet time. We will now ask for closing statements. Again, please stand and proceed with your closing statements, again in voluntary order.
Growing up, my parents talked about we don't appreciate what we have until it's gone. with a glass of clean, fresh water right here in front of us, sometimes it doesn't seem like we have to be really worried about this. But we know historically that this is a precious resource that can disappear very quickly. And I think so many great points have been brought up today. Cody, you talked about public education and making sure that we get people on our side with agriculture that aren't in our industry. Kyle, you talked about government influence and tax breaks and things like that for our farmers and agriculturalists. And Mary, I think you did a great job of driving home the point that this isn't just water security, it's also food security. I think we have to end on looking at what Farm Bureau and our working committees can do to ensure that our state and our agriculture industry is included on our drought plan, that we're not left out, that our livestock are taken care of, and that we also remedy the relationships we have with the public to ensure that we do care about endangered species, we do care about public places for recreation. We're part of a team, we're not being selfish. So it's a great thing that Farm Bureau is being active in this, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
One thing has become certain here today, and that's that water rights can become very confusing. But the other thing that has become certain here today is that the need for making this a priority is very present. And I'm happy to have been able to be a part of this discussion today and talking about the importance of public education, starting locally, working on this from a local standpoint, figuring out what our needs are, working with the water management working group to help them find the information that we need to make informed decisions going forward. I'm excited to see what kind of things are going to come out of this water working management group and the proactive solutions that we're going to come up with for water management here in Kentucky. Thank you.
It was a pleasure being part of this discussion meet. It's meant to be educational. I think it truly was to me, and I hope it was to the rest of the audience as well. In Kentucky, we're blessed to have such a great Farm Bureau and such a great water management group we have here today. It's because of Kentucky and their work with the United States District Court of Appeals 6th District, we were able to put a preliminary injunction on the water of the U.S., and we're able to use that and stop that the way it is today. And we need to think, going forward, this is just a halt. This is not a solution. We need to continue to fight. The fight is here. The fight is today. If the definition were the way it was 30 years ago, we might not be in the building we're in today because it runs parallel to the Ohio River, and we might not be able to develop where we're at today. So we need to continue to push forward through Farm Bureau. We need to work with other colleagues, other groups, because it affects them as well. And by doing that, I think we'll be able to put a successful halt on the waters of the U.S., shut down the federal government overreach, and continue farming, continue growing our family farms. Thank you.
Likewise, I enjoyed the discussion. Being a full-time farmer, this was very enlightening to realize what a serious topic this is. Being a resident of Kentucky and taking our water for granted, or cussing our water if it's muddy and we're out there, or sometimes too much water aids to a lot of disease in our plants. But I've come to appreciate the opportunities that we have, the potential opportunity we have to build some infrastructure in our state to prevent something such as a catastrophe in California. I loved the ideas of all the stats Randy was able to bring. We need to learn from our history. Kyle, I love the networking piece that you brought. I think that Farm Bureau can really help spearhead us moving in the right direction, both all from a county level, state level, and national level, to make this turn our words into actions. And Cody, I think that I love how your focus is on the consumer. We've got to make sure we can always look at both sides of the coin. And ultimately...
Time has been called. Thank you, contestants, for a very lively discussion. The two discussion meet finalists are, first, Cody Rakes from Fayette County. Next, Miss Mary Courtney from Shelby County. This year's state runner-up is Kyle Kelly from Owen County. And the 2015 Kentucky State Farm Bureau Discussion Meet winner is Mr. Randy Adams from Anderson County. Randy will get a Kawasaki Mule, compliments of Southern Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, and will represent us in the national contest during the AFBF annual meeting in Orlando, Florida. I'd like to thank everyone here for joining us for the 2015 Young Farmer Discussion Meet Finals.